I'm Allie Jackson-Jolly. I'm here with Marcus Collins. He is a professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business at Michigan. He is also the author of For the Culture, The Power Behind What We Buy, What We Do, and Who We Want to Be. Marcus, welcome and thanks for being here. It's great to see you again.
Always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I feel lucky to be talking to you today. I know that many call you the culture whisperer. So who better to talk to about what we saw during the presidential inauguration yesterday? Of course, I'm talking about the fact that many of us watched as President Trump was sworn in yesterday to become the 47th US president. This all happening in the context of a time that many are calling a inflection point of culture. So, what did you see at the inauguration that you thought was an indicator of a cultural shift?
I think it starts with us first need to define culture. I think about culture through a Durkheimian lens, that culture is a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do. It is a governing operating system of humanity, one might say. So we talk about these shifts that are happening in culture. What we're really talking about are the shifts in our operating systems, the shifts in our expectations, or shifts in our conventions that govern what's acceptable for people like us. And if you look at the inauguration, the swearing in, all the pomp and circumstances surrounding that moment, that day, they were all a departure, a divorce from the conventional conventions and expectations of what one would expect from an incoming president. Right. The idea is that the incoming president, is supposed to graciously talk about the president before them and say, thank you for bringing us to this point, and now we're going to go here. The next steps are here. That wasn't the case. There were more disparaging remarks that, that we're about to step out of the Stone Age into the Golden Age, a rebuffing of the previous administration. Instead of it being sort of filled with the president and his family and his incoming cabinet and all his people, instead it was a who's who in the tech giants, the tech billionaires, the people who lead the sort of are arguably the biggest companies or the most powerful companies in the country. I think the biggest shift in all this that probably is the antecedent to many of the reverberating shifts we'll see. I think we're seeing a relationship between capitalism as a culture and politics as a culture finally find themselves in congruence. And the ramifications of that would be that politics and all the things associated with running our government is up for sale, just like any other capitalistic endeavor.
Yeah, so I feel like you're talking about in part the fact that at the in the front seat were some of the actually I guess hard stop the wealthiest person in the world.
That's right.
Of course, Elon Musk, who as of right now is the biggest billionaire in the globe, sitting up front with other wealth creators. Whereas years past, those seats would have been reserved for the president's incoming cabinet. So let's talk a bit about that. What is that? So on one hand, I hear you say it is a indicator that perhaps capitalism is closer to commerce and closer to the marketplace than it has been in the past. Um, but what does that say, do you think, culturally to the American appetite? Does that, when you see that Elon Musk, the world's billionaire, is the front and center, does that say to you, well, the American appetite is for industry leaders and entrepreneurs?
I think that there is a sort of fascination that Americans have had for the wealthy, just considering the culture that the backdrop culture of American society is capitalism, and therefore we've been conditioned to look at the wealthy and fawn over them. I mean, I remember growing up, one of the it shows was the lifestyles of the rich and famous. And even in my early 20s, there was MTV Cribs. And
Yeah.
even if we listen to a lot of the popular music production, cultural production in the form of music, a lot of it is as a fascination. It's a praise of materialistic gain. And so it's just been kind of built in us to look at that. I mean, one would say, you know, the old Kanye put it well. He said, and I spend $100 on this just to be like, you ain't up on this. And I can't even go to the grocery store without a shirt that's clean or a jersey with the team. It seems we're winning, we're living the American dream. Those highest up have the lowest self-esteem. So this want, this fascination over wealth. And to see it so close to the most powerful position in the country says a lot about uh, where we are as a society. And the fact that it is being celebrated in the discourse through the public says a lot about how society has now accepted it.
Yeah. So speaking of which, by the way, you made me realize your students must be in for a treat that you are quoting Kanye West, the old Kanye West.
Old
Thank you for
Kanye.
saying that, the old Kanye West, not the
Yeah.
new one. So that was fun. But speaking of hip hop culture, because you brought us there, one big cultural shift between the 2016 inauguration and this inauguration was that in the first time the president was being sworn in, Snoop Dogg and others said they would not be a part of the celebration. Many artists prohibited the Trump administration from even playing their music, around the pomp and circumstance. Let's fast forward to now, in which some of the OGs, original gangsters, were happily a part of it. Snoop Dogg, Rick Ross, who am I forgetting? Nelly,
Nelly,
right?
Soldier Boy. Yeah.
So that's a big culture shift. What does that tell me what you were thinking when you think this through?
When I think about the role that many of those artists play in the Black community, in the hip hop culture, it felt like a betrayal. Especially considering, we have Snoop on video, on tape, as they say, um, uh, very doggedly, very convicted, with much conviction, you know, slamming those who decided to perform the inauguration in 2016. And now to see him a part of it feels like a betrayal, especially considering all the rhetoric that President Trump has had around the Black community, and some of his policies that are completely at odds with the interests of the Black community. To see Snoop uh, participate in the inauguration event feels like a betrayal. And what it says to me is that everyone has a price. Everyone has a price. And unfortunately, some of that price is is achieved through financial exchange, and some of it is achieved through barter systems. And I think that this sort of sums up to me a lot of where we are as an electorate, and a lot of where we are as a society. So, what is the cost of civility? There's people who voted for Donald Trump who said, "Look, I don't like the guy. I don't like what he says. I don't like what he sort of stands for. However, my eggs are too expensive." And you go, "Man, but so what's the cost of civility then? That like so you would exchange civility for cheaper eggs. You'll exchange civility for a bag." Right, as the hip hop community says when it comes to getting a check, right? What is the price? And it says to me that we have a price. And I think if we look at the political rhetoric over the last 8 years, we see senators or representatives who have flip-flopped on their stance. Have the vice president, the vice president called his running mate who is now president, he called him Hitler, right? And here we are. Now he's running with them. Now he is, in office with him. It's almost like the receipts don't matter. And everyone has a price when it's in their best interest. And I think that, in many ways, that's one of the driving forces of capitalism, that there is an exchange rate in which people will enter into exchange. And unfortunately, civility has a very low cost to it.
Yeah, but so let's talk about, the price of eggs, right? Because that also leads into what many political um, analysts have been thinking about, which is the fact that the Black community did vote for Donald Trump. More of the Black community voted for Donald Trump than did the last time that he
Mhm.
ran. The hope of Vice President, then former Vice President Harris now, um, when she was candidate Harris, was that she would be able to garner more of the Black vote than President Biden did. In fact, she didn't. She got 80% of the Black vote, whereas he got 90%, while Donald Trump this time got 20% of the Black vote. 20% of the Black voters voted for him. That was up from 13% 2020 and up from 8% in 2016. And so many, again, going back to this idea of a inflection point, have talked about identity politics, at least liberal identity politics, not resonating anymore with American voters, resonating less, at least, with Black voters than it had in the past.
Yeah.
And part of that being um, the cost of eggs or the cost of survival
Hmm.
being more important than thinking about only identity politics. So talk to me. That's a lot. Talk to me
Yeah,
about
there's a
that.
lot to unpack. Well, I think so. We saw that 92% of Black women voted for Kamala Harris, right? Very close to what we saw with President Biden. And the truth is, there's always been Black Republicans. That's not a new thing, but there was some slippage, but not as much as sort of the has been mythologized. And I think that the shifts that we did see in the electorate this time around points to another cultural shift. And that shift is around that of misogyny, that there's this sort of sense of, masculinity, a reclaiming of masculinity, sort of the edgelords that exist on the internet that live in the manosphere, as it were, is becoming a part of the zeitgeist. You even heard Mark Zuckerberg say, we need more masculine energy. It's like, well, what are we talking about here? So there's this sort of reclaiming, reworking, reestablishment of quote unquote masculinity. And Kamala Harris, as a Black woman, is antithetical to everything that is associated with that kind of frame. So that's happening there. And to the point of using the cost of groceries as a way out. I think that's an easy scapegoat. That's a tangible thing that you can point to without revealing sort of your biases, without revealing some of the things that may feel like a betrayal to your identity. And I think that, when we talk about identity politics, they first were sort of based upon how do you identify as a Democrat or Republican. Then it was identity politics based on how you identify from gender, race, class, household, or household income, or education. But if we look at this through a cultural lens, how we identify is tethered to how we see the world, our ideologies. So identity has not been sort of things that we see on the veneer, your age, your race, your geography, your household income, your education status. Our identity is associated with how we see the world. Because of who we are, we see the world a certain way. So I say identity politics is alive and well. They are not predicated on the historical labels that we have assigned to people. They are far more communal in nature. They're far more ideological in nature. They're far more cultural. And people who subscribe to, for lack of better words, the manosphere, the Joe Rogans of the world, people who subscribe to that ideology, you know, because of how they identify, they see the world a certain way and then frame a Donald Trump versus a Kamala Harris through those mechanisms, through those recontextualizations, and therefore cast their vote a certain way, whether it's their public vote conspicuously articulated on social networking platforms or how they actually cast their vote for a particular candidate.
Yeah, and so we're almost out of time, but I have maybe 2 more minutes with you. So I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to weigh in on one other cultural shift that many have been talking about, and that is the shift away from leaders, at least outwardly, to be so decisive, and many to try to, especially in the corporate realm and the nonprofit realm, to try to ask the American people, the voters, to, hey, let's press pause and give people a moment. One of those places that we saw that during the inauguration, of course, was when Elon Musk gave a very interesting salute to the crowd. Um, Many likened it to a Hitler salute, others at least to a fascist salute. But the ADL, the the Anti-Defamation League, had asked, "Hey, everyone, just take a moment." It was absolutely an awkward um, gesture, but let's not jump to conclusions. Let's make sure that we're not purposely trying to tear each other apart. Talk to me a bit about this, that we are seeing some leaders say, hey, whereas you and I both know, those of us who lived through the first time President Trump was elected, everybody was constantly up in arms and poking holes. This time, there seems like there's less of an appetite for that, at least from many of the corporate leaders.
I think there are a few things at play. One, there's just exhaustion. I mean, we've been at this for 8 years. I mean, he went quiet for a little bit after the insurrection of January 6th, but this has always sort of been playing in the background, sort of like an app buffering while you're on another app on your phone. It's kind of always been there. And we've got 4 years ahead of us, right? To start day one up in arms, and then we're going to be exhausted by the end of it and might lose the fight. So the will to fight rather. So the idea of like, hey, let's temper ourselves a little bit. I get why one would do that. Also, I mean, we are dealing with a different President Trump this go round than the first. I mean, this is a far more revenge seeking Trump. This is one who are not buffered by the establishment of politics, the culture of politics that once were, that there's a decorum that one once had. This may not be necessarily illegal, but it is antithetical to the norms, the social norms. That Trump is not hindered or constrained by that anymore. And I think everyone who crosses him is potentially in his crosshairs, from media to organizations to institutions of higher learning to everyone. I mean, we all are, I think the idea of like, hey, let's temper ourselves is one, not to lose gas, but also perhaps let's be sure about where we want to swing, in the unfortunate possibility that we swing and miss and find ourselves, having more hurt than we would have gotten. I think of all of this, together, the alchemy of all this starts to put more context on all things. When we look at some of these shifts, the shifts in like closer to masculinity, this shift from like the norms of politics to being the norms of business, commerce. Of course, we would have a CEO as president. Of course, his consiglieres won't be the top generals or the top people with notoriety within politics. Instead, they'll be the top CEOs in the country. Of course, that it's this merge of capitalism and politics that we're living in where we are operating like we are in an organization, that we are a part of a company that is governed by the fiduciary wisdom of a company doing well. And as we know, in many companies, that we are not ourselves, these full-flesh social actors, as human beings. Instead, we are a box in the org chart. And unfortunately, we're not all at the same level. And those who are more marginalized are going to find themselves in more peril and more vulnerable to whatever wherever the wind may blow.
Yeah, well, now we are out of time. Marcus Collins, thank you once again for being here with us. I feel like this conversation could have gone on and on and on, but hey, listen, next time you see something interesting happening in the culture shift, give me a call. Let's do it again.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.